Welcome back to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink, Thursday, July 25th. And a little bit of a change of pace on the podcast this week. We're going to talk some IU women's basketball. Haven't really touched on that program since the conclusion of the season, but it's been an eventful offseason for Terry Morin and her program. And to help us break things down with the women's program, Austin Render, the voice of the IU women's basketball program, also the host of a new podcast, the Dribble Drive on the Back Home Network. Austin, welcome to Podcast on the Brink. Thanks for making the time.
Alex, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it. Always fun to talk some basketball here in July.
So I wanted to just first talk about, obviously, your new endeavor with the Dribble Drive on the Back Home Network, your new podcast. I know you're trying to get the word out there and grow the show and get people more interested. What's that journey been like so far? And I know you've been doing episodes now for at least a couple of weeks, maybe a month or so. How's that been going, and what's been the reaction so far?
Yeah, we just published episode number 6, I believe, and 7's coming out. They come out every Monday, live on our YouTube, on the Back Home Network YouTube channel at 7 o'clock. Used to be on X, but the folks at the higher ups at X took away our streaming abilities. So just on YouTube now, but obviously available in all your podcast spots as well afterwards. The point of it was just that I just felt like for the past couple of years, everything in the Big Ten was Caitlin Clark and then everyone else. And I'm not trying to take anything away from her. I just feel like the rest of the league should have been propped up more than it was. And so I think it was just kind of, oh, yeah, Caitlin Clark's in that league. Oh, yeah, Iowa's in that league. People don't realize Iowa hasn't won the conference regular season title each of the last 2 years. So there's a lot of good athletes in this conference, a lot of good teams, a lot of good coaches. And so my idea was strike while the iron's hot. I mean, women's basketball is as popular as it's maybe ever been. And I felt like we had a spot in the podcasting where there's just not a lot out there. One of the things I like to do when I prepare for games is I like to go and see if there's a local podcast about the team that we're preparing to play against, because local people know the team the best. And there just is an absent kind of area when it comes to women's basketball podcasting. So I was hoping to fill that void. I think so far we have it. The feedback's been good. People seem to really be enjoying it. I enjoy it. It gives me an excuse to talk basketball. And I think it'll be really fun when we get into the season. We'll be doing recaps and we'll try and have some players on. I think it would be a really good thing. Right now we're doing a lot of previews. And then once we get to kind of November, I think it's really going to start to pick up.
Yeah, I agree with you just in terms of the coverage of Big Ten women's basketball in the last couple of years. As someone who, I cover the men's team, but I obviously watch a lot of the women's games, and it felt like a lot of times the last couple of years, the Indiana women's program specifically, when they would play Iowa or play another, their major opponent, it seemed like the conversation would always get back to Caitlin Clark. And like you said, nothing to take away from Caitlin Clark. She's been phenomenal for the game, and I think kind of her impact on the WNBA so far this summer has been even greater than most people expected. But, the one frustrating thing is, as someone who, casually more or less follows the women's program, is it seemed like a lot of times in women's college basketball, everything else was an afterthought beyond Caitlin Clark. And there's a lot of great stories. So I think it's good that you're trying to expand beyond just that and tell stories from around the conference. And I know you're doing a lot of things, catching up with different people from around the country, talking about different programs. So I think that's an excellent thing. So good luck with the podcast, and hopefully it continues to go well. The reason I called you today to go on this show is I feel like it's an interesting time for Indiana women's basketball, and that there's a bit of a transition because, obviously going from Grace Berger graduating to last season, there was still a great player in the program with Mackenzie Holmes returning, and the expectations were that Indiana would again contend for a Big Ten championship and a deep run in the NCAA tournament. They gave South Carolina a great run last year in the Sweet 16. It was a fun team to watch. They played well together all season. I think, obviously the fan support was the best it's ever been at Assembly Hall, but I think there's some question marks just in terms of what it's going to look like going into next season without Mackenzie Holmes. What are your, you watch this team as closely as anybody. You're there for all the games. You're calling the games. What are the biggest challenges facing Terry Moore in this program as they kind of go into this new era without Mackenzie Holmes, who is unquestionably one of the best players to ever put on the jersey?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think the general consensus is that Indiana is going to take a step back. And you kind of feel like you've been waiting on that in a sense because ever since Terry Morin's been here, I mean, it's just been just a slow incline of success. One year you knock off the WNIT, then you get to the NCAA tournament, then you win an NCAA tournament game, then you make it to the Sweet 16, make it to the Elite Eight, win a conference title. Every year something seems to be kind of an improvement on the other. And even last year it felt like just a mini step back in the regular season, but then of course getting to the Sweet 16 was great. So I think the consensus is, well, Indiana's due for a step back, but it kind of feels like the Kurt Signetti thing with Terry Morin. Like I'm going to believe that she's going to keep this thing going in a positive direction because that's all she's done since she got here. There was a moment there in her third season after they made the tournament in year two that she stepped back, but outside of that, it's just been a progression of good things happening under her and new benchmarks set each year. So I don't expect it to be that big of a decline. I think the roster is composed of a lot of really good pieces. And the question to me is going to be who is going to step up and be the star? Because I think they've got a ton of role players. You've got Chloe Moore McNeil, who's really, really good. And her progression, her career has been so cool to watch. Sydney Parrish is a wonderful shooter, great team leader, really good kind of third or fourth option offensively. Yarden is the one that I feel like can turn into the star, or at least has the most potential to be that star. She's so good. You can see it when she wants to be. She's so hard to guard. She can shoot over almost anybody. She can finish going downhill. She can stretch you out and shoot the three-pointer. I think that she has the biggest potential of being that quote-unquote star. And then they add a couple of great transfers. Caroline Strickland from Tennessee will help kind of fill the Mackenzie Holmes void. And then Shea Chesky, I think, and we could talk about her as we go here, but she is, I mean, you lose Sarah Scalia, and you replace her with someone who was second to the Big Ten as a freshman in three-point percentage at 42%, led Penn State last year in three-point makes and shot 37% from the floor. So another great shooter to add to a team that already led the Big Ten and the country last year in three-point shooting. So I understand where people are coming from when they say that it's going to be a step back. And here's the thing. You're adding UCLA and USC, two top 5 teams in the country, to your conference. So in position in the conference, they may take a step back. They may not be second. They may not be third this year. Doesn't necessarily mean it was a worse season, but it is going to be such a good conference. I think Indiana will fit right in.
You talked a bit about some of these players being role players in the past and needing to step into maybe bigger roles. On Chloe and Sydney and Yarden, what you can touch on them specifically, each one, but what do you think is the next step in their progression as players to kind of maybe take on a bigger role? Because the last couple of years, they've been able to comfortably kind of play that role of, second or third option. In many cases last year, third option was the highest spot any of those three players took because Scalia and Mackenzie Holmes were so instrumental in all Big Ten players. But I'm curious on those three specifically, what they can do to kind of raise the level of their game. Is there anything specifically for each player that you look at and say that this player can do this much better and to take on maybe a bigger role next season?
Yeah, I think for Yarden and Sydney, it's about defense. I think Sarah Scalia didn't get enough credit, and I tried, and I know Terry tried whenever I talked to her to kind of promote how good and how much she had improved on the defensive side of the floor. She was kind of our number 2 option behind Chloe. So they need they need those other people to be better defensively. I think last year was honestly one of the worst defensive seasons the Hoosiers have had under Terry Morin. But they scored so many points that it didn't necessarily hurt them that badly. but I don't think the numbers were as friendly last year defensively as they have been in the past. So I think for Sydney and for Yarden, they've got to be better defensively. And for Yarden, I think another thing she can add to her game is a little bit of a post presence. They did this a little bit when Mackenzie was dealing with her injuries late in the season and Lily was dealing with some injuries. They had Yarden practicing during shoot around, doing some drills with the bigs, running some at the five. I'm not saying that she needs to be a five. She can be a four, but still have good post moves. I think that'd be a great kind of addition to her game. And I also think for her, it's kind of being ready to go at all times. I think just a few times throughout games, she has mental lapses. She'll commit an offensive foul. She'll have a silly tic-tac foul called on her. And I think mentally that gets to her. So I think being a little mentally stronger for Yarden will be better. More locked in from minute 1 to minute 40 will help out a lot for her. For Chloe, I think that having Shay Chesky on this team is really going to help her. The thing that she struggled with last year was when you have Grace Berger, you've got somebody to A, handle the basketball and B, facilitate with you. Last year, a lot of that was put on Chloe because Sarah's not a point guard. Sydney's not a point guard. Yarden could do it, but isn't really meant to be a point guard. Lexi did a really good job off the bench last year. But I think having Shay Chesky, who can be a point, can be a shooting guard, she can do both, takes a little bit of that pressure off of Chloe to run the offense. And that allows Chloe to not exert as much energy on the offensive side of the ball. And she can continue to be the defender on the number one option on the defensive side of the ball. I think when she's having to break the pressure every time down the floor and guard the team's best player, that's a lot on her shoulders. So for me, I think just the addition of having another quick guard at the top of the key is really going to help Chloe.
It seemed like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that last year, at least at times in the season, Terry Morin relied more on her bench, some of the younger players than she had in seasons past. What benefit do you think that will have going into this season for some of the younger guards on the team last year in particular, who got maybe some extended run that they wouldn't have normally got last season, now that they could potentially have a larger role and have more, minutes ahead of them? What benefit do you think that will have for them? And also, do you think it's becoming a thing where Terry Morin is starting to trust maybe her younger players a little bit more than she had in the past? Because it seemed like in the previous seasons, the rotation would get super tight at times, like late in the season. And it felt like last year, at least at certain times, that she was playing a little bit deeper of a rotation than normal.
I think she knows she has to at some point. I think the 2 years ago, one of the things that happened with the team, they were so good, obviously. They got a number one seed. They had the Holmes injury, which hurt, but I think everybody was just a little fatigued by the end of the year. They were averaging 32, 33, 34 minutes a game, a lot of high minute players because the bench just wasn't there. So I think she knows that she has to use her bench, especially in the non-conference, especially early in the year, figure out what she's got, keep these players fresh for the new year, and allow them to go on a run later in the season and be a little bit fresher. I think this year, and I think we all say this when we look at a roster in the summer, but I think this could be the deepest team that Terry has had. You talk about the starting five, it's those three guards we've talked about, Shay Chesky as well as the fourth, and then either Caroline Striplin or Lily Meister starting at the five. The other one will come off the bench, and I think that will be a nice little platoon system between the two of them to not stack up the minutes too much, because Lily has had issues at times with foul trouble. So if she doesn't need to play 30 minutes a game, I think that's helpful. Then you've obviously, I don't know what we're going to get out of Charnice Curry-Jelks coming off the pregnancy and everything that she's been through. But if she's able to give you a couple minutes a game, that's helpful too. And then at the guard position, Lexi Bargesser can come in off the bench. And then last year's two freshmen who are now sophomores in Juliana Lamondola and Lene Beaumont, I think both can be really, really good pieces for this team. They've told me that, and I kind of believe it having watched her practice, that Lene Beaumont can be an offensive player like Grace Berger. She has really a lot of fluidity to her game, really good at finding her spots. She's strong and physical down low. The issue is she came into college unable to defend at the college level. And if you're going to play on the Terry Morin team, you have to be able to defend. She struggled with that last year. It's why her minutes really weaned as the year went on. It's why Lamendola got more playing time because she was better on the defensive side of the floor. So if Lene, which if I know Lene, which I've gotten to know her over the last year, she's going to put her head down and get better at defense here in this offseason. She's going to come out and be ready to go because I think that's too valuable of an offensive option to not have her on the floor. So I think adding those two, Faith Wiseman's one. I don't know how she's going to fit in year one, but could get some spot playing time as well. Henna Sandvik, another one that could get some spot playing time. So this is a team that I think early in the year will be 9 to 10 deep. But then as you get into the Big Ten, it'll be interesting to see how short the leash gets because you're certainly going to have 7 with Lexi and either Lily or Caroline coming off the bench. I'd imagine you've got at least 8. One of those sophomores are going to contribute. If not both, there's 9. So I think this could be as deep as Terry Morin has ever had a team, which could be a huge advantage come March.
How do you think being deeper impacts them defensively? Can they be more aggressive in how they want to play defensively? You mentioned them, dropping off some defensively. What were, in your eyes, some of the issues last season defensively, and can having a deeper team moving forward help address any of those issues?
Yeah, I think just general freshness is something that's going to help. I mean, it can't hurt to be fresher defensively. I also think that Shea Chesky will help again in this area because she is a fast guard. And one of the things Indiana had trouble with defensively last year was keeping fast and quick guards in front of them. Other teams, I look at the Illinois team is the perfect example of a team that really exposed Indiana because they have 2 of the quickest guards in the Big Ten, and they're both back, by the way. And they can go straight line drive to the basket at almost any time. And Indiana really struggled to keep them in front. So I do think that having Shea Chesky and Chloe at the top, 2 very quick guards, can help out. Another thing that's going to have to be better defensively now is you lose Mackenzie Holmes, who was a good rim protector, one of the best shot blockers in school history, and all Big Ten defensive selection, Big Ten defensive player of the year. But I think if you get your perimeter defense to be better, then less pressure is put on your 5 to be that rim protector. I think Mackenzie Holmes was put in a position a lot where the guards around her got beat and she had to come over and help. So hopefully the defense can be better on the perimeter, allowing Caroline Strickland and Lily Meister to play a little bit more freely down low. I don't know necessarily if there's like a correlation between the statistics and what may happen with them being better rested, but I can only imagine that playing somewhere in the 26 to 30-minute range per game is going to make your body feel a lot better by March than in the 31 to 35-minute range.
Yeah, we definitely saw it at times, at least a couple of seasons ago when they played a shorter bench. But I think in general, just in college basketball, watching it as long as I have, I mean, the teams, obviously when you get down to the end of the season, you get into a tournament situation, you want to have your 7 or 8 that you go with in most cases. But if you can play a deeper bench up to that point and not burn all your players, because let's face it, if you're going to make a deep run in March, you've got to have your legs for those 3 straight weeks in the tournament. And if your team is kind of run ragged by the conference tournament, you see a lot of teams that they've had a great season, but at a large cost to the health of their players over the long season, playing them so many minutes. So I think definitely having a larger bench throughout the season, even if you're not going to go that deep in when it matters most, is beneficial. You talked a little bit about Shea Chesky and Caroline Strickland as the 2 kind of newcomers. They're the 2 transfer portal additions for Indiana this season. What's just been your general impressions of both of them? I know you've seen Shea play quite a bit because she played previously in the Big Ten at Penn State, and Caroline Strickland, my understanding, was a pretty high-level recruit who played at Tennessee, and maybe statistically didn't make a huge impact there, but now with the change of scenery coming to Indiana, we'll see kind of what her impact is on this program. As you mentioned, could split time with Lily Meister at the 5. But what's been your impression of both of them so far, and kind of what can they bring to the table?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting eyes on them at practice in September, October, because I'm super excited about both of them. You're kind of sitting around, you know the needs that the team has when the season finishes. You need a big because Mackenzie Holmes is leaving, and that wasn't a slight on Lily Meister. That's just you need someone else to be in there because Lily's not ready to take over all of that role yet. And then you need another guard because you lost Sarah Scalia. You could use somebody to take some pressure off Chloe, and they went out and fit both of those needs. Caroline Strickland, 91 games at Tennessee, 39 starts. She's very experienced. She can also stretch the floor, which I think is good in today's game to have all five positions at least available for that pick and pop kind of opportunity. She took 89 threes of the last two seasons, 34% shooter, hit a couple against Indiana down in Fort Myers this year with 13 points, which actually led Tennessee in that game. You mentioned it. She was highly rated, top 50 player out of high school, a top 10 forward in the country. So somebody that was super good. Alabama Miss Basketball just kind of got stuck behind some really, really good players at Tennessee and carved out her own role and did good in that role, a career best, a little over 7 points a game last season. But I think she could truly be somebody. And again, you don't need Mackenzie Holmes' numbers because the Mackenzie Holmes don't grow on trees. If they did, we'd grab one every year, and everyone would. But if you can get something in the 10 to 12 points a game, 6 to 8 rebounds a game, something like that, let's just say she averages 11 and 7. I mean, you're probably pretty happy with that, especially if Lily can add 8, 9, 10 points and 6, 7 rebounds. I mean, that's what you need. You need those two to just kind of combine to be really solid underneath. So I don't think I don't think there's as much pressure on her maybe as there was on Mackenzie. She just needs to be solid. Chesky, somebody that, yeah, we got a lot of looks at her when she was at Penn State. Streaky player, had a 40-point game on 8 made threes against Central Connecticut State, but then she'd have games where she'd have 3 or 4 points. So I don't remember her being all that great when they came to Assembly Hall last season, but she is streaky. She's shown her capabilities, what she can do. She averaged nearly 12 points as a freshman, 11 and a half as a sophomore. We mentioned the 3-point percentages. How about 51 points in her state championship game? That's not bad. So she has the capability of filling it up. She was an all Big Ten honorable mention last year. Took a big jump, I thought, even though her points per game went down and some of her shooting percentages went down. I thought she was a better all-around player in year 2 than she was in year 1. So there's a lot of excitement around these two that they've added. I think they'll be impact people right away. And I think the most important thing was that Terry Morin and her staff saw the holes and they filled them immediately, didn't waste any time with the portal, brought them in, signed them, and I think that they're going to fit in quite nicely.
What you watched this program as closely as anybody the last couple of years, but dating back to when she was hired, I can remember it was the summer of 2014, late in the summer, when the move was made to hire Terry Moore. And I was actually up in Montreal, Indiana. Men's basketball was up there for a foreign tour, and news broke at that time that Terry Moore was going to be the hire. And that wasn't necessarily a huge name or a sexy hire when you saw the news come through. Somebody coming from Indiana State that had played at Purdue, people I think were excited for the new direction, but didn't really know what to expect. And Indiana women's basketball historically has not been a great program, but if you look at now what she's been able to do over the last decade, it's been really impressive. What in your mind has made Terry Moore such a good fit for Indiana and has allowed her to elevate the program to where it is today? Because if you would have told people 10 years ago that Indiana would be perennially contending in the Big Ten, going to Sweet 16s, going to an Elite Eight, winning the Big Ten conference title, I think a lot of people would have said you're crazy, but that's exactly what's happened under Terry Moore.
Yeah, I think there's just something when you attend practices with this team and you're around them, you feel the camaraderie. And I know that that's kind of a buzzword, like, hey, we want to have a team that's close, yada yada yada. But like this team truly resembles as close of a team as you can get. They embody the closeness, and I think that really helps. And there's a reason that they're picky about who they go and get in the transfer portal, because they want them to fit. They don't want to just go out and get a good player because they're good. They want to go get somebody who they know will fit in their system. Caroline Strickland had ties to Indiana. They recruited her out of high school, so it's not there were existing relationships there. So again, that makes sense. They've seen Shea Chesky play. She's going to fit in great. Makes sense. But you think about like what they did 2 years ago, bringing in Sarah Scalia and Sydney Parrish. Sarah Scalia is somebody who could have easily didn't get to start most of her games in that first year and could have easily said, this isn't for me, I'm out. But she bought all the way in. They knew what they got in her. And then, of course, year two, she takes the huge jump. Sydney Parrish has been a home run transfer addition ever since she got on campus. So you hope, and it's not always that way, but you hope that these two they've brought in this year could be home run transfers like they did 2 years ago. So there's just something about this team. The past couple of years, they've been very close. They work well together. There's good communication. All of that shows itself on the floor, I think, with this team and why they trust each other. They trust each other so much. There's no, like, I got to be the star of this team. Chloe could go for 18 to 20 points one day. Yarden could go for 30 points one day. Sid could go for 25 points. It's just kind of they check their egos at the door. It's very much a let's do this thing together type of team, and I think that the sum at times can be greater than the parts that kind of make up this team because they work so well together.
Last thing before we wrap, I wanted to talk about some of the new teams coming into the Big Ten. Obviously, you mentioned UCLA and USC. A little bit different on the women's side than the men's because obviously those, the programs are coming in from the men's perspective too. But last I checked, UCLA on the men's side is expected to be pretty good, but not necessarily the favorite or anything in the league next year. And I know Washington on the men's side is rebuilding. Oregon was a tournament team last year. USC rebuilding under a new coach. But on the women's side, it's going to be different because you could have these teams coming in as potential favorites going into next season. What are you expecting out of these four new programs? Obviously, you mentioned USC and UCLA, but also Oregon and Washington. I know Oregon's been a program that historically has been pretty good, at least from a talent perspective. Sydney Parrish began her career there. But I'm just kind of curious what you think of how this changes the women's basketball hierarchy in the Big Ten moving forward.
Well, you've got arguably maybe two of the three best players in college basketball on the women's side on the same team with USC. You've got Juju Watkins and Kiki Iriafen, a transfer from Stanford. You combine their points per game last season, you're looking at about 47 points a game just from those two. Talia Van Olhoffen from Oregon State, a double-digit scorer last year. Obviously, Oregon State, Washington State kind of both got picked clean with everything that happened with those two programs. So Van Olhoffen goes to USC as well. They also bring in three recruits in the top 16 nationally. It's one of the best classes in the country. So that team's going to be loaded. UCLA is going to be loaded. They only lose one real contributor from last year. Lauren Betts is back. Kiki Rice is back. London Jones is back. And those three all played together. And I found this out. We just had Dave Marcus on the podcast. It's coming out this week. But Betts, Rice, and Jones played on the U16 AmeriCup team along with Sharnice Tamia Gardner and Janiah Barker. And Barker and Gardner have both transferred into the USC program or UCLA program. So now all five of them that played together on the U16 America team are now all playing together with UCLA this upcoming season. They had three players in the transfer portal that averaged double-digit points last year. They bring in a really good class of freshmen as well. So the LA schools are going to be 1 and 2. They might even be 1 and 2 in the country. Probably not because South Carolina and UConn deserve to be up there, but they're going to be 1 and 2 in the preseason rankings in the Big Ten. I think it's a huge advantage that Indiana gets them coming here instead of having to go to LA. I think that's a big time advantage. They have to come play in this environment, but they will be 1 and 2. There's no doubt. Washington's a rebuilding team. Tina Langley's in her 4th season there. She's done a good job kind of bringing that team up out of the wilderness a little bit. They bring back a couple of double-digit scorers in Delia Daniels and El Ladine. So they've got some talent there. They were kind of middle of the pack in the Pac-12 last year toward the back end. But again, everybody was good in the Pac-12 last year. Even Oregon, they've had a couple of down years here, but Kelly Graves has been there for 10 years. He's had some Final Four teams. He's had a lot of really good talent. The thing that's going to be interesting about Oregon is this is a team that brought in 7 transfers from the portal, and one of them being Deja Kelly from North Carolina, one of the best players in the ACC. But they bring in a ton of transfer pieces, so it's going to be very interesting to see how they all work together. They were just 2-16 in the Pac-12 last year, but that's a team that is going to look completely different than everybody saw them last year. So that will be interesting to see how they fit in. So there's going to be no easy outs in the Big Ten this year. We knew that would be the case, but adding 4 more really, really good teams makes this league as deep as ever. There's going to be somebody that finishes 8th or 9th in this league that could make a run for the Sweet 16, the Elite Eight. It's going to be that good of a league. So I'm so excited to see how all of this plays out.
Do you think it's realistic then that 8 or 9 Big Ten teams make the tournament next year?
No doubt. There's been 7 the last 2 years. You're adding 2 tournament teams already guaranteed in the LA schools. So I think 8, 9, maybe even 10 could make it into the NCAA tournament this year. I think it's as deep of a league as we've ever seen. It's probably the best league in the country, in my opinion. So I think the best conference will be rewarded with the most spots.
Well, Austin, thanks for making the time. It's always good to talk some Indiana women's basketball. The program is not what they've done really over the last 10 years under Terry Moore, nothing short of remarkable. As I said, if you would have told me 10 years ago this is where the program would be, I would have said you were crazy. But here we are, and I know you'll keep fans informed on your new podcast, and also it's fun listening to you on the call for the women's game. So continue the good work there.
I appreciate it, Alex. I feel like I was born on third base with this team a little bit. I joined them just at the right time. It's been a ton of fun, and hopefully this year provides a lot more great memories for us.
Absolutely. Thanks again to Austin for coming on the show this week. If you enjoy Podcast on the Brink, please leave us a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.